Another good day at the arena. The king comes out with his army of troops. Looks like another match is about to begin. The king's win streaks haven't been too good, so he's made a new deck to finally score a win. But wait, what's that sound? Those hog riders? No, they'd scream their name. And who? The king looks back and understands what happened. And he yells,
"Who let the hogs out?"
That's right. They're not hog riders, but royal hogs. These are the king's new royal pets who enjoy chomping on apples as well as towers. They've been a part of the game since 2018 and have remained a strong card ever since. However, it seems many players aren't giving them the attention they deserve. So today, I, ARCTO, will do my job and share the history of the Royal Hogs, which you might not have known. Who knows, you might even decide to swap out your 2.6 Hog Rider deck for 2.6 Royal Hogs. But first, let's talk about this. Are they actually better than your average Hog Rider? Well, that's a debatable topic. Royal Hogs are fast, have high health pools, and together, they deal more damage than a Hog Rider, all for just 5 elixir. One more than the Hog Rider. To understand more about the Royal Hogs, let's first begin with their story. First off, Royal Hogs weren't actually going to be Royal class, and they were going to be called Wild Hogs. Wild because the devs wanted to make a little background for the Hog Rider. These Royal Hogs would be roaming around Hog Mountain before they were tamed by the riders. While this was a cool idea for the story, the artists felt like it would be hard to animate a clear attack with small tusks, so they decided to give them helmets for headbutts. Then they added the little feather and boom, they became royal. Now for their game history. Royal Hogs were introduced as a rare card along with the Snowball spell in the summer 2018 update on June 20th. Why would they add a massive snowball in the dead of summer? But that's not our topic. An interesting fact about Royal Hogs is that they were buffed before they were even released. Yeah, their hit points were increased by 15% and their spawn formation was changed to a straight horizontal line rather than a square. And throughout their history, Royal Hogs have been a card that, well, to be honest, have never been overpowered, but they've also never really been weak. When they were released, players were debating if they'd be a good card to use, but they'd soon be proven wrong. And despite their usage rate being 3% today, they can easily still win you multiple games. That is, if you play them correctly and with a good deck. Since Royal Hogs were a very versatile card, they found their places inside many decks. Speaking of decks, some of the most notable decks featuring Royal Hogs include the 2.6 Royal Hogs cycle, 3 Musketeer Royal Hogs and Royal Recruits, Royal Hogs with Fireball Bait, Royal Hogs QQ, where QQ stands for Earthquake and Queen, Royal Hogs with Mother Witch for top piggy action, Mega Knight Royal Hogs, and many more. You might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of decks. I can't believe I didn't notice this sooner, and I agree. However, Royal Hogs have rarely been a card you could simply mindlessly spam and expect to win, especially in the current metas. There was also a crash bug that occurred when the Royal Hogs received splash damage while jumping over the river, causing the game to quite literally crash. This issue was fixed shortly after it was reported, thank God. So, to get the most out of our Royal Hogs, we need to first understand how they work and the strategies involved in using them effectively. So, Royal Hogs are excellent rush units at the start of a game, due to their fast movement speed and ability to jump over the river. As a swarm card, they can be harder to counter compared to a single Hog Rider. For instance, placing a mini P.E.K.K.A., a common counter for Hog Rider, is a lot less effective against Royal Hogs because you have to deal with multiple units at once. While many troopers can quickly turn your Royal Hogs into ham and sausages, your opponent will need to overcommit on defense and spend an equal or greater amount of elixir to fully counter them. This, of course, results in a positive elixir trade for you, allowing you to damage the opposing tower. Unless your opponent drops a Mega Knight, a very strong counter to Royal Hogs and a significant obstacle to your plans. Another effective counter is Bowler. His knockback and area damage can eliminate the Royal Hogs quickly, and he can withstand every damaging spell in the game, so keep an eye out for him. Spells are the most effective way to quickly eliminate Royal Hogs, with Fireball providing the best value. This led to the creation of Fireball bait decks. Large swarms and buildings also remain effective counters. Among these, the Bomb Tower is particularly effective against against Royal Hogs due to its high health, lower elixir cost, splash damage, and ability to distract them. As a result, the usage rate of Bomb Tower increased, making it difficult for players to pass through. However, this issue was addressed in 2019 when Supercell introduced the Earthquake, and Royal Hogs were rarely seen without it afterward. Royal Hogs have a substantial health pool, and there is a good reason for this. It balances out their relatively low damage output. Even though they deal less damage, it's unwise to ignore them. Their high health allows them to effectively tank for each other and deal significant damage to a tower, potentially even destroying it.
He's probably got E-barbs over there. Yo, what is he doing? Oh my goodness, you're gonna regret that one, big boy. I don't know why I'm dropping this off over here, but hey, I am. Watch this. Yay.
If you're not careful, they can achieve a 3-crown victory if they provide support to that push. And speaking of support, why not scroll on down there a bit and hit that like and subscribe to support this channel. We're getting closer to 20k subs, so that's genuinely amazing. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to our hoggies. One deck that got popular at the time in 2018 was the Three Musketeer Royal Hogs, and you'll soon see why. Yeah, there was one feature of this card we haven't discussed yet: splitting them. However, splitting them alone is generally not a good idea, especially if done behind the King Tower. The optimal placement for splitting is higher up on the battlefield, and players typically split them in response to an opponent's deck that either includes Mega Knight or Three Musketeers. But don't mistake this for a surefire way to identify your opponent's deck. You'll usually find out when they first split the Three Musketeers behind the King Tower and then position the Royal Hogs high up. Anyway, this strategy was to split the Three Musketeers and follow up with Royal Hogs. The Hogs dealt damage to the tower while serving as a valuable shield for the Musketeers, allowing them to either deal damage to the tower or focus on the troops attacking the Hogs. Players cycled between these two cards with the help of an elixir pump. For defense, this deck included Bats, Goblin Gang, and Valkyrie, making it highly effective. This deck was a powerful deck back then and can even be stronger today with just a few card swaps. Another very strong and popular deck was the Royal Hogs Royal Recruits, 2 royalties in 1. Royal Hogs were used as the primary win condition, while Royal Recruits provided some big defense. Although it was a relatively expensive deck, with the power it had, it was worth it. Soon this card would receive a buff. On August 6th of the same year, Supercell decreased the Royal Hogs' first attack time interval to 0.1 seconds from 0.75. That just made them even stronger. Their usage rate peaked at, just 1%? 1%! Well, in the top ladder, that is. In the mid ladder, it was a different story. To say how high their usage rate was in mid ladder, we can't really get super specific, but the frequency I saw and remember now, it might have been probably like 20% or so. That's my best approximation. But because they were strong, Supercell decided to give it a little nerf by increasing the attack time interval to 1.2 seconds from 1.1, and their first attack time interval to 0.25 seconds from 0.1. But honestly, this change didn't really affect the Royal Hogs. Plus, from the same balance change, Valkyrie was actually nerfed and the Royal Recruits damage was buffed. So the Royal Hog Royal Recruit deck, or Royal Hog Recruit deck, was stronger than before the balance change. The usage rate for the top ladder stayed unchanged, and the same could be said for the mid ladder. These changes were relatively minor, but the balance update on November 5th of the same year marked a significant turning point in the Royal Hogs history. During this balance update, Supercell reduced the Royal Hogs' damage by 6% and decreased their mass from 4 to 2. You might be wondering, what exactly is mass? Well, mass is a hidden stat that plays a crucial role in how a unit interacts with others. Essentially, mass determines how easily a unit can be pushed around. And to put it simply, mass is a measure of how, well, chunky a card is. For example, the Golem has a mass of 22, allowing it to push through anything in the game with ease, like a bulldozer. On the other hand, Skellies have a mass of 1, so they can slip through troops effortlessly due to their slim build. With the Royal Hogs mass reduction from 4 to 2, they became much more maneuverable. This change allowed them to navigate through troops more easily, rather than pushing them away like the Hog Rider. Here's a table of the card masses from July of 2020 so you understand it a little bit better and can analyze it a bit. If you're interested, hey, you can pause the video, I can wait. Done? Alright, let's move on. After that balance change, Royal Hogs became even more effective in the decks where they were already strong. The reduction in mass was a game changer for them, allowing them to navigate around other cards more easily and reach the tower faster. As a Clash Royale player, you know better than anyone that in this game, time is crucial. It's all about earning those crowns quickly. In 2019, nothing game-changing really happened with the Royal Hog stats, but the decks, oh boy. Though players were making more decks, they were also refining the existing ones, only to make them even stronger. For example, the Fireball bait deck got even better. Also, the Three Musketeers were still a very good deck. It's in this period that a new Royal Hog deck would be created, the MK Royal Hogs. While Mega Knight pressured the other side of the arena, Royal Hogs would rush the opposite side, pressuring the opponent into spending all of his elixir on defense. After this update, their usage rate again saw a tiny increase, but the difference between mid and high ladders was still noticeable. In the top ladder, they still had a 1% usage rate. Competitive players weren't too fond of the Royal Hogs as a good win condition, and they preferred other cards. But that deck would pale in comparison to the other decks that would be made in the future, because of one new spell card. In April of 2019, Supercell released a new card called Earthquake, and they were a complement and a remedy to one of the big problems Royal Hogs users were having at that time: buildings. And that gosh darn bomb tower. Players would now combo the Royal Hogs with the Earthquake. Always, either on the Princess Tower to do additional damage or to help the Hoggies quickly take down the buildings without taking too much damage. As you could imagine, this was very OP, and it can be even today. Not only for buildings, but Earthquake was also used as a clutch a lot of the time to finish off a Princess Tower and score an easy win. Earthquake is still being used with Royal Hogs even to this day. The two together are now the perfect duo for the maximum damage the Hogs can inflict. So that's how Royal Hogs performed in public matches, but how did they fare in other game modes? Well, in grand challenges, they were favored by many pro players and frequently recommended as part of a deck, and in touchdown mode, Royal Hogs dominated the mega deck touchdown game with many unfair wins. If opponents didn't have a building to counter them, victory was nearly impossible, especially after the mass change, but it wasn't impossible to counter, and there were many instances on how they could have failed. But the flowchart went like this: do you have Royal Hogs? Yes. Win. No? Lose. However, their dominance was short-lived. On November 26th of 2019, Supercell removed Hogs from the Mega Deck Touchdown, only to sneakily add them back in again. Yeah. So as time went on, the Royal Hogs then soon died off. Sure, they were still used a lot, but they weren't a meta card. So Supercell decided to fix that. And what better way to increase card usage than buffing its damage? So on February 4th of 2020, Supercell buffed the Royal Hogs' attack damage by 6%. Not as a whole, but each hog got a 6% damage buff, which in total makes that a whopping 24% total damage buff. Now that's a lot of damage, and it only made the existing decks stronger, like Three Musketeer Royal Hogs for example, with now adding Hunter to provide more air defense, and as expected, new decks were brought to life, and oh boy, they were not any weaker. For example, the Royal Hog bait strategy is exactly what it sounds like. Baiting out the opponent's card on one side, while on the other, the Mini P.E.K.K.A does its job, protected by the Ice Golem. And if you manage to combo the Royal Hogs and Mini P.E.K.K.A while the opponent runs out of elixir to defend, you'll most likely score an easy tower and sometimes a 3 crown. Another OP deck was the Royal Hogs Prince, with of course our good old Earthquake. This was equally, if not more deadly than the previous deck. Mortar was very decent at that time too, and did passive damage to the Princess Tower. 2020 wasn't the final year for Royal Hogs to make a significant impact in the arena. The introduction of champions in 2021 brought a fresh set of powerful cards that shifted the meta, rendering many existing cards less effective. And despite this shift, Royal Hogs experienced a different path. The new champions were good counters to the Royal Hogs. In response to this, Supercell decided to buff the Hogs. So in September of 2021, they increased the Royal Hogs damage by 6%. That change was also big, nearly 50% more damage than what the Royal Hogs had delivered back in 2018. And as a result, Royal Hogs became even more strong, capable of chipping away at enemy towers at a much quicker pace. Look at our little piggy boys go. During this time, old decks like the Three Musketeers and Royal Hogs were dominating the arena. Hunter also took a big part in popularizing that deck because of his recent buff. Another card that was buffed was Poison, which prompted Royal Hogs with a new deck, including the Hunter for the Royal Hogs Hunter Poison deck. But this deck was nothing compared to the next one I'm gonna mention. So with this new damage boost, a new deck emerged. The Royal Hogs Queen Quake, or Royal Hogs QQ, which will always be remembered as one of the best decks in Clash Royale history. I mean, this was the deck that the #1 Clash Royale player was using back then, and it was for a good reason. Royal Hogs Queen Quake, or shortly known as Royal Hogs QQ, quickly proved to be a game changer. Featuring the Queen, which provided both high damage output and versatility, combined with the Earthquake spell for area damage and control, this deck was not just a simple upgrade. It offered both attack and defense. The Royal Hogs Queen Quake deck allowed players to place Royal Hogs with greater effectiveness while using the Queen to target troops and buildings on their way. Plus, you still had that handy-dandy Earthquake spell to clear out enemy troops and towers. During this time in pubs, your victory was based on one simple question: do you have Royal Hogs? If yes, congrats, you win the match. If not, well, try again later. Let's go gambling! Oh, dang it. I swear my brain rot's getting bad. Just search up Gamble Core on YouTube. That's all me and my buds have been doing in our Discord calls. Now you can just watch more clips of this deck in action. As you can see, Royal Hogs have been improving over time, and players have noticed these changes. Royal Hog decks began to pose a problem, and players did not take their time to bring that to Supercell's attention. The synergy between various cards and decks has become incredibly powerful, often overwhelming opponents. Another great deck we kind of forgot to mention is the 2.6 Royal Hog cycle. With this deck, you can continuously deploy Royal Hogs, and because the deck's average elixir cost is only 2.6, it's very easy to get back your Royal Hogs incredibly quickly. Royal Hogs Royal Recruits was also back, and stronger than ever. Since the Royal Hogs were now a bit too powerful, Supercell decided to decrease the Hogs damage by 3% in February of 2022. And also during this time, they nerfed Fire Spirits, Log, and Earthquake, but that change wasn't really able to stop the Hogs from, well, hogging enemy towers. In fact, people started focusing more on cycle decks more and more, eventually going down from 2.9 elixir, then 2.6, like we said earlier, and even to 1.7 elixir. Golden Knight and the Skeleton King were nerfed too, making the Queen the superior choice. Royal Hogs and Mini P.E.K.K.A. also became more viable and arguably more powerful due to the addition of the Tornado and Magic Archer. The strategy remained the same, but with some enhancements and more reliable defensive capabilities. In October, they got a little nerf where the Royal Hogs' first attack time interval got increased to 0.4 seconds from 0.25, which again, really didn't cause a big change to decks, rather they got a little more balanced, and in 2023, you could say they were now weaker because of card evolutions, which is arguable, but during this time the most powerful combo ever would be created, and you'll soon find out about it. But first, we can't forget about the old decks, because they were still very strong, even against card evolutions. And this goes to show how versatile and powerful this card still was with the combinations from 2018. It's simply unforgettable. Clash Royale in 2023 also saw the rise of a very powerful deck that was countering the Goblin Hut meta back then. The Royal Hogs were combined with the Elite Barbarians and Queen, which was very powerful, like always. The Evolved Knight worked exceptionally well with the Royal Hogs by distracting enemy troops and dealing some massive damage. At that time, it was considered very broken, which contributed to its effectiveness. Everything worked out unless you got ducked with an F by Clash Royale. Mega Knight was always a hard counter for Royal Hogs. And the new combo, I promised you. You might not expect it, but it's Royal Hogs and Evolved Skeletons. This combo is super simple, yet destructive if one of the evolved skeletons managed to hit the tower once. If they do, oh boy. Your opponent might even get 3 crowned if they don't get rid of those little Larrys. Another card that fit well into the Royal Hogs deck was Royal Delivery. When used effectively, it provided essential utility for stopping enemy pushes and delivering an unexpected counterattack with a shielded Royal Recruit. When it worked, it was a highly effective addition to the strategy. This was only a small piece of the pie for all the Royal Hogs decks that, ever existed, but the versatility Royal Hogs had in them was simply unmatched. Royal Hogs were the only card that could be inside of those decks, and those decks alone. There's always room for fan-created concepts, and I have some interesting ideas to share with you. The first one is the Royal Hog Rider, a combination of 1 Royal Hog and 1 Royal Recruit. The idea is that the Royal Recruit would target any nearby units, while the Royal Hog would focus on troops and defend when on your side of the bridge. This could be a fascinating addition, as it would be the first hog to attack troops as well as towers. It is a very cool idea indeed. But wait, I've got an even cooler concept. So why settle for 1 Royal Rider when you could have 2? Personally, I think Supercell might have already introduced a card like this, given that they already have both the Royal Hog and Royal Recruit. However, such a card would likely be too overpowered in-game and would require some significant balancing, potentially taking years to perfect. Another concept shifts the focus from the Royal Hogs card to the Mother Witch. Imagine an evolution that allows her to spawn Royal Hogs instead of just regular Cursed Hogs. That could be an incredibly powerful evolution, likely leading to a spike in her usage rates before being nerfed back down. Still, a fascinating idea to consider. Speaking of evolutions, Royal Hogs could also benefit from one. A promising idea I've seen involves an evolution that reduces splash damage, making them less vulnerable to fireballs and other spells. And while this is a solid concept, I personally think a shield, similar to the one the Royal Recruits have, might be even more effective. As for where Supercell could place the shield, well, that's anyone's guess, but at least it would serve a purpose. If I personally could improve the Royal Hogs, I probably wouldn't change anything, because they're honestly incredibly balanced. As I mentioned earlier, they've never really been overpowered or weak. The reason Royal Hogs have remained powerful is their synergy with various card combinations and decks, which optimize their damage and utility. In Clash Royale, there are generally 2 types of cards: those that excel when paired with other cards, and those that shine on their own. Royal Hogs fall into the first category, although they are also capable of taking down a tower independently. Royal Hogs serve as a prime example of how a card can start out seeming fairly normal, but with the right deck combo, it can become a formidable force, capable of inflicting serious damage on enemy towers. But the history of the Royal Hogs is nothing compared to the history of the Giant Skelly, a card with the biggest balls in all of Clash Royale. His journey dates all the way back to 2016. And I know I say this about every video I make, but genuinely one of my favorites on the channel. So, go watch it now. I'll see you there.